Welcome to Small Talk Daily for Wednesday, September 22nd, 2010. This morning I wanted to go through a very simple example of taking an existing domain model and hooking a user interface to it in VisualWorks. Now to get started, I have this very simple line reader class, and all it does is take a file that has individual lines in it, read them on a carriage return delimited basis, and create a list of objects. So if I take a look at what it does, line reader text on this file I created called lines.txt, it just answers this list, line 1, 2, 3, and so on. So I've got all these things in a list. That's all it does. So the reading is really simple. If I go in here to the process lines method, all you can see is I'm reading up to carriage return. And in the initialize method where I read, you can see the only thing that's interesting is that I'm first removing everything from the list and then adding to it. And this has to do with the UI that I'm going to layer on in a moment. So all this is just reading through that file. Let's go to the UI. Over here on the class side, I've got my window spec. Let's edit that, and I'll bring this into the view so you can see what I did. And I'm doing it this way so you don't have to watch me drag things around on the screen. I've got a list box object, which is from up here. And then I've got an input field so I can type in a file, and I've got a button that I can press to both read the file and fill the list. That's all there is to this UI. So I drag these things down, line them up a bit, and then hit the install and define button. The define button is what puts this thing here. So here it's selected just that because I've got it selected. If I deselect and hit define, you'll see that it comes in and offers to fill in the thing behind the input field, behind the button, and behind the list box. Now let's go ahead and see what it generated. We'll close this. We'll go over to the instance side and we'll look at aspects. Really, the only two methods that it generated of interest are these two. So for lines, it gave me a selection and list object. And that's really a holder on a list object. So it's a wrapper around a list object that lets the list box have its underlying contents replaced dynamically in a way that allows you to update things from a model. And likewise, file, just a wrapper around a string object. So the action happens in my button presses. So I'll go into the actions method. It filled in this method here with a stub, and I filled in this with real code. So I check to see if the input field has anything in it. Obviously, if it's empty, I don't want to try to read the file. I could do more exception handling like does the file exist, but I'm not going to worry about that here. And then I call the read method in the model. So all the action happens in the model. Now how does that work? How do I actually hook up the UI and model? That happened in the initialize method. Here I created a model object, and model is an instance variable. If I go to definition, when I created this class, I added by hand a variable called model, and then I went over and made sure that it was stuffed with a new instance of my line reader. And then I set the list up, self lines list. Remember I said that lines is a wrapper around a list object. I handed it the same list that the model has. So I have line reader, the domain model down here, and it's got a list object, and I have the UI looking at the exact same list. So when I make modifications to the models list, they'll be reflected in the UI. So let's see how that all hooks together. I'll do this, and I'll open this up. Notice everything's empty. I'll come in here to my input field, and I'll type lines.txt. I'll hit fill, and there it is. Now let's replace this just to make sure it works. I have a file called webtools.ini, which is a configuration file for my blog server. And there it is. It comes up with stuff filled in. So you can see that it replaced the contents with what was down there. So you can type in new files and it'll be replaced. Now what I'll do is I'll export this code and have a link to it in the show notes for this screencast so you can download it yourself and take a look at it if you didn't really completely follow along with what I did. So that's about it for today. Until next time, have fun with small talk.